All right. Well, we only have a little over an hour, so I'll get us started and people will trickle in as we begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Absented Presence, Exploring Lost Heritage of Ancestral Land in Eastern Turkey, formerly Western Armenian Heritage. My name is Kate Simola. I'm the program coordinator at Zoryan Institute. Since its inception in 1982, the Zoryan Institute has been dedicated to raising awareness on issues related to genocide, human rights, and diaspora-homeland relations through education and scholarship. And this event is no exception. Today, we will be exploring the genocide that engulfed the lives of Ottoman Armenians in 1915 and 16 and left long-lasting traces on their cultural heritage. After being subjected to cycles of state-sponsored destruction, confiscation, and architectural alteration, Armenian heritage sites have lost their shapes and become relics of their former selves. Today, these sites constitute the physical settings for Armenian roots tourism in Eastern Turkey, the ancestral heritage tours that the descendants of genocide survivors from Armenia and the diaspora undertake. This talk explores how material spaces shape the descendants' experience of their ancestral homelands. What affordances and agencies do they have to tell a story, emit meaning, and elicit emotion in visitors? These questions are what our guest today, Dr. Aysenur Korkmaz, explores in her research. We're thrilled to have her here today. Korkmaz is currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study in Amsterdam. She obtained her PhD from the University of Amsterdam in European Studies. Her work focuses on the multifaceted after effects of the Armenian Genocide in Soviet and post-Soviet Armenia. The crossroads of history and anthropology, she explores how the genocide survivors and their descendants in Armenia have been reflecting on violence, the violent past, losses, and expulsion from ancestral homeland. Korkmaz published several peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on the Hamadan massacres, the Armenian Genocide, post-genocide memories in Soviet Armenia, and the Armenian roots tourism in Eastern Turkey. Korkmaz is also a graduate from the Zoryan Institute's Genocide and Human Rights University program and a longtime friend of the Institute. And again, we're thrilled to have you here today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to you. And we're so excited to learn from you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kate, for inviting me. I am really appreciative for all the support that the Zoryan Institute has given across all these years that I have been studying and also writing my PhD. And so today I'm here to give a part of my PhD work as a lecture. I went on these journeys with Armenians from Armenia into their ancestral homelands in Eastern Turkey, which happens to be my nation state, the state that I was born and raised in. So today I will talk to you about the Armenian heritage spaces that people view in these journeys and the state of the heritage itself with so much destruction and absenting, and the type of material and immaterial relationships that arise from the encounter between the Armenians who travel and visit these spaces and the spaces themselves. So I am going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint presentation. Let me know, Kate, if you also see my notes on the PowerPoint. I wouldn't want to share those. Let me get into it right now. And then so now I'm sharing my screen, but not my notes, right?
You can still see your notes if you go to presentation mode. That should fix it for us at the bottom.
Oh,
there.
yeah, actually, 1 second.
Perfect.
So, Okay, welcome everybody. It's really an honor to be here. I'm really, really excited about finally being able to present this work. It was an emotional journey for me as well, being on the tours with people. I will describe the details later in the talk, but I want to express how emotional it can be and daunting it can be to actually be with these spaces when your respondents are actually the ones who are imbuing it with meaning. So somehow you take on that meaning and see it through their gaze, through their lens. I will talk about three things today. One, I will try to describe and contextualize the journeys within my own theorization of it as Armenian roots tourism. And in this, I will try to present my ethnographic account of the itineraries, and I will also give some descriptions of the tour participants, what type of tour participants are taking these tours, joining the tours. And then I'll briefly explain how I gained research access. And then I will talk about particularly the sites that Armenians visit. And as a part of this, I will discuss my own understanding of the Armenian heritage sites and their current shape as an absence presence. So we will discuss, well, I will discuss how these material spaces appear as absent and at the same time present, and how they come to shape the experiences and subjectivities of Armenians. Let me begin by roots tourism. I struggled a lot to call this roots tourism because the people I was on the journeys with often called themselves uhtavor, in Armenian, pilgrim. And they would call the journeys pilgrimages also. And there is a reason for this in Armenia, and I'm sure also in the diaspora. There is a kind of a negative perception of what tourism is, right? As a leisurely travel, as something for fun. And so often I would be on the journeys, and the people, when they would try to describe themselves to locals or to each other, they would have these discussions about the sacrality of the land, the sacrality of the journey, and how they themselves actually should be separated from tourists. But at the same time, the economic aspect of the pilgrimage that we were all in was always there. And I mean, anthropologists would know that these aspects of morality of the travel and the economical aspect of this travel are kind of inseparable. So we don't really try to see them as binary, but as something that comes as a package, as an assemblage. So I basically followed literature on roots tourism. There's so much on roots tourism that has been written in general, mostly for populations like African Americans traveling back to Ghana to explore their ancestry of slavery, or Caribbean populations, again, tracing their roots, tracing their ancestral histories back to Africa. There is so much work on the transatlantic Irish, Canadian, Irish American roots tourism, mostly Canadians of Irish and Scottish descent, going back to the homelands, the ancestral homelands, and basically trying to find information on their ancestors, visiting the lands, and emotionally and spiritually connecting with the land, connecting with the sites they visit. So this is the type of gaze that I wanted to take for the Armenian case. And so this is why I call it Armenian roots tourism, but then see it as an umbrella term under which situational manifestations of tourism and pilgrimage somehow run together. So with that, actually, I want you to keep in mind that the journeys themselves are temporally fluid, so they're contingent. The roots tourists' identifications and the relationships they have with these sites somehow change over the course of travel, and so they sometimes become more secular. At other times, they become tinged with religion, with neo-paganism, the Hetan religion, or with Christianity, Armenian Christianity. Most of the sites they visit are religious sites that have become heritagized, obviously. So this is why I believe roots tourism as a form of a productive term to understand the whole journey without actually getting into this discussion whether the travel itself is important or not. I want to talk briefly about itineraries. So these tours from Armenia to Eastern Turkey became possible in the late 2000s. Before this, there was very little contact, given that's the border between Armenia and Turkey has been closed ever since Armenia's inception. So most of the time, people travel from Armenia to Georgia and then down to the northern part of Turkey, and they enter Kars, and then they go down to all these 6 provinces Armenians used to live. But these are not the only type of itineraries. There are actually so many different types. A very popular one is a mountain climbing tour. It's either a climb tour to Mount Ararat or to Mount Nimrut. And these are their own itineraries, so they don't really include any other place. The goal is to climb onto the mountain over the course of 5-6 days, and they're very, very popular among youth in Armenia. Other types of tours are packaged, like for instance, towards the Kilikia region. People would go 5-6 day on 5-6 day tours to find out about the history of historic Kilikia, and then if they have connections, ancestral connections, then they also add those stops, those heritage sites into the itinerary as well. So it's not always type of several package tours, but it is also tailored to the needs of the people, to the needs of the customers, and often tour companies in Armenia do this. I have mostly joined during my fieldwork. This is when I was doing my PhD in 2000. So I started in 2017, 18, 19, those 3 years, I joined tours. I will present here 2 of the tours because they were like really the most productive for me, and I have gathered so much more of my data from these tours. And one of them is a sort of a customized tour that I took in September 2018, and then another one which I will show later in April 2019. And I want to talk briefly about like what we did on the tours, and then later I will explain how I got into the tours and what my role was in the tours, etc. This is like one of the most exclusive type of tours that includes so many different locations. For instance, you depart from Yerevan at midnight, and then you just take a bus to Gümri, and then you end up in the Turkish border. First thing that welcomes you is, after, of course, obtaining your visa, is Ani. You stop around Childer village, Lake Childer, and then after having breakfast, you go to Ani. Ani is one of the most crucial sites that Armenians want to visit because it has this weight of being in the close proximity, physically being just by the border, but not being able to be reached out. So Ani, aside from being an important medieval heritage site for Armenians, it also has the weight of being absent and present at the same time. So visibly seen, but not being able to touched by the other side of the border. And then, of course, you move on and you go down to Kars. You kind of go around Mount Ararat along the way, and then end up in Mush if you if you want to take it towards the southern part. But other people also go to Erzincan, Erzurum. What we did was mostly Mush, Sasun, Batman, Bitlis. These are most important four cities / towns now for Armenian heritage, because these are the places where most Ottoman Armenians originated from. In Armenia, there is about 2 million Armenians, and almost half of the population has at least one ancestor from what is today Eastern Turkey, and most of these people are from these regions. So Mush, Sasun, Bitlis, Batman, Erzincan, etc. And there are also, of course, people from the Gedikya region, Hajin, Adana, Hatay Armenians. They also live in clusters in Armenia. So these are the types of local networks that have, during the genocide, have been transferred to the South Caucasus, and that later became Armenia. Anyways, so this is one of the itineraries, and then the second itinerary mostly looked at Van region, so it kind of ended around Lake Van, but it also followed the first part of it also followed the same route from Childer to Ani, and then to Doğu-Beyazıt, to some of the landmarks that are important for Armenian heritage, and then ending up in Akhdamar, and then return. You don't really see the return in the dots and the route, but the route mostly takes the same type of roads, the same type of places back to Georgia and then to Armenia. So Armenian roots tourists are often interested in these types of package tours to visit certain sites. So one of the sites that are like really important is Armenian churches and monasteries. Of course, this is because most of the heritage sites that are still somehow visible and somehow present, though they are in ruins and actively being ruined by treasure hunters, and I will get to that. These are the most important visibilities, I would say. And then later there are, if a person knows where to go exactly, another site might be an ancestral home. So people actually go on the journey, particularly to find their ancestral home. Battlefields and graveyards are another types of sites. So Most of the battlefields, for instance, they're not from the period of the genocide, but before. So most of the Armenian fedais fought, or they fought Ottoman army and gendarme around Sassoon, around Mush, and the plains of Mush, etc. So like these sites have gained some significance in roots tourism. One of them, for instance, is Suluk Bridge. This is an important site for Gevorg Çavuş in Armenia. He's a national hero, and there are, schools and places that are named after him. There are museums in his honor. And so this is like one of the important sites for Armenian roots tourism, where the visit happens and people learn about Gevorg Çavuş and the Suluk Bridge, and the importance of the Fedai movement in the 19th century. But of course, these sites are, other than the signification of the presence, other than the presence of the people who are there as roots tourists, or the tour companies, the tour guides, there isn't much that actually signify them as Suluk Bridge or battlefield sites. So somehow there is this parallel understanding. When you are actually in the place, nothing says this is an important site for Armenians. There is no signification. The Turkish state basically has a different name for the bridge, Murat River, Murat Bridge, and it has a history, like a placard that says the history on it. Is about, being from 10th century, and basically takes a different type of a reference to tell another history of the bridge, which is normal, obviously, because every nation state makes place with these, by choice, by a certain history writing, and marking places with placards is actually very much in line with this. I want to go back a little bit with the churches. It's quite interesting because what we see with the churches mostly, I actually also want to say something else before. When people are in the presence of these sites, they're often looking for something familiar. Actually, everywhere they are in Turkey, in Eastern Turkey, in Kilikia, they're looking for a familiar face. They're looking for a familiar stone. They're looking for a familiar church, something that is part of their own, which is really heartbreaking because there isn't much left. That's one. And two, there is an ongoing ruination that is happening as we speak. There's so much treasure hunting, so much hate-based destruction of these sites. There are housing projects by the Turkish state to actually raise entire neighborhoods, entire historic Armenian neighborhoods to the ground, not considering them as heritage sites, and converting churches. For instance, the third picture on the very right is currently functioning as a mosque named Kümbet Mosque in Kars. Nothing has been changed in the architecture, except there is a minber, a praying place, that has been added to it, and that's obviously the functioning of it and the changing of that architecture and the ritual that is being practiced there is enough, obviously. But these types of alterations, and these types of ruinations that are happening are basically making a lot of Armenians feel that they need to save, they need to salvage the lands, they need to salvage the heritage, and that they are in there to find something familiar. At the same time, I mean, I talked a little bit about this otherness feeling. Everything, even the sites that are considered to be a part of Armenian heritage are not being cast as Armenian. So that creates a lot of anger and sometimes the manifestations of hatred, feelings of uncanniness among roots tourists. This absence, this you know, this feeling that they're not being able to locate where the heritage is really frustrating. And all they see is this otherness, you know, the new houses, the faces of the people, the fact that everything is bustling. There are you know, restaurants, people are moving on with their lives, and they're living on that land. The land is living, is actually creating so much of that feeling of otherness and uncanniness. Excuse me, I need to go back here. And I want to see then this absence and presence, which is kind of like the condition of these sites, as something really important, as something to be reflected on, because the sites have been altered. The churches have been either ruined or turned into mosques. The bridges and the ancestral homes, the graveyards have all been physically changed, or they lack signification, or they lack a form of the right history telling, history writing. Doesn't mean that they are actually eradicated. In some forms, they can be physically eradicated, physically absent, but even the type of shapes that are left from them physically, even if it is a piece of stone, it actually really, really matters. And that's what I wanna talk about a little bit, because I believe that these sites are, by their own shapes that are ruined, are somehow a testimony to the history. So instead of actually looking for places that are complete, that is a complete Armenian church, you know, Akhtamar is a church, but it is kind of lacking the bell, for instance. I don't know if here doesn't have the bell on it, or it doesn't have the khach on it, and so there are things absent from it. But at the same time, I do believe that these absences are somehow manifesting themselves in different ways. And I want to take a good example here, which is these stones. Often, if you go to Eastern Turkey, you'll find not much of you know, Armenian heritage spaces. You'll find ruins, you'll find intact structures of Armenian, like school ruins or church ruins, etc. But what you will find is actually church stones that are like all across villages. So these ruined church structures, crumbling stones, have been taken, and somehow they became incorporated into the facades of houses. So it's very, very normal to find these stones that have marks and engravings on them. And I want to reflect on these because they really puzzled me for such a long time. Often scholars of genocide studies look for destruction. We are so obsessed with destruction and genocide, right? But genocide is not only about destruction, it's also about survival, it's also about resilience. There is an afterlife after genocide. The things that are aimed to be destroyed are never fully destroyed. And I believe that these stones are a good testament of this. And the absence presence, which I borrow from Peter Balakian, he considers this as a sort of this paradoxical thing that can be describing the ruined state of Armenian heritage altogether in Eastern Turkey, is really quite relevant. Balakian writes that the material presence of Armenian heritage is always left at stake with the ruination, with the destruction and confiscation, and also the genocide, the continuous genocide denial in Turkey. And he believes that these the Armenian heritage being absented present or absence presence somehow represent a forbidden past, an irreclaimable history, a ruptured process of mourning that all inseparable from this paradox of an embodied absence. And so I borrow this term, absence presence, from Peter Balakian to look at these stones as a form of an ontological thing that is present and absent at the same time, but in different shapes. And I do believe that this, the concept of absence presence is actually a really productive one because because of its relevance to genocide studies, especially cultural genocide and the aftermath of genocide. Often genocide scholars will not talk about the aftermath of genocides. It's usually anthropologists and sociologists who deal with genocide from the fringes of literature will actively talk about what happens after something is destroyed and people are removed and the spaces are destroyed. And actually, the reality is that things like these happen. Stones become incorporated into everyday life. Now, we might see this as a form of sacrilege, a defacement, because the churches, the stones that used to belong to the churches don't exist anymore. But at the same time, the other end of this is that the heritage that has been destroyed found new lives as a part of a house, and actually unintendedly maybe they became saved from further destruction because these are, they're part of another structure, they're kind of housing another life, another set of lives, generations to come. But nobody would want to destroy their own homes. And so what happens in these tours often is that my respondents would just go find the stones and the villages and would just talk to the people who live under the roof of these houses. And sometimes people take a minute, leave their belongings in front of the stones, treat the stones as a part of that sacred that once was a church. And so all of these mundane spaces that do not really matter otherwise to this strange eye, to the outsider in Eastern Turkey, actually become places of signification. And this is where I want to invite you to think about the power of the material. the power, the unintended power of the material, the sacrality that comes out, that becomes exhumed, for the right person to actually see it. I want to finish there, actually. Now it's been half an hour that I'm talking. But I want to thank Kate and Zoryan Institute for setting this up, and it's been really, really joyful to have given this lecture.
Thank you so much, Dr. Korkmaz. And thank you everyone for coming today. We're going to have some time for questions now. So I'll give you a moment to gather your thoughts and pop your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom here. And maybe Dr. Korkmaz, if you want to have a look and see what's in there while I just keep talking for a moment. While you gather your thoughts, thank you so much for attending today. And if you'd like to support and follow Dr. Korkmaz's research, please reach out to the Institute and we'd be happy to connect you with ways to follow and support all the important work that she does. If you'd like to support more programming like this one, please donate. As a nonprofit, we depend on the generosity of people like you as donors to allow us to put on this kind of programming. So every little bit counts. Anything that you can offer us is a huge help and supports work like Dr. Korkmaz's. So I will have a look in this Q&A box here and see what we have. We've got 4 so far, so we probably have time. Oh, it just keeps going. We probably won't have time to answer all of them, so I'll just see if there's one that jumps out at you, Aysenur.
Okay, some of the questions actually resemble each other, so I will try to group them. Alan's question about economic tourism, is it perceived like that by local inhabitants, but is it existential pilgrimage by the diaspora members? Partly yes, partly no. We're talking about Armenia, right? In Armenia, there is a tendency to boycott travel like this. So as much as the travel itself, the pilgrimages / roots tourism is popular, there is a great type of moral argument that comes from irredentist sites that by traveling to Turkey in any form, any shape, it doesn't matter if it's pilgrimage or not, you are helping the Turkish economy. So there is also that type of moral objection to the moral obligation that has been packaged as a form of pilgrimage or roots tourism. Sayat's question, why did she choose her topic? And then there was somebody else, Sayat, and another Sayat, what inspired you to embark on a professional journey? Somebody else asked if I was of Armenian descent. Okay, so what inspired me? It's an interesting question. I'm not Armenian. I am Turkish Iraqi, and I was formerly a historian who studied the Armenian Genocide, like from archives, and I thought there wasn't much room for this, for saying something new, obviously. And so I decided to do something on Armenia. And I literally went to Armenia empty-handed, not knowing the language. And I wanted to explore and learn the language, live there. And I started asking people about their family histories. There were 2 types of directions that the project took me to. One was the family tree, so the genealogical imaginaries of Armenians. And the other was this roots tourism. So I decided to basically take on the journeys, like a lot of people. And from there, I believe there has been a wonderful type of interaction and a very fruitful ethnography for me. The Turkish state well, in the form of border police, if you call it a Turkish state, a part of the Turkish state's institutions have been really curious about me also in the ways that you ask your question, like, why am I interested in this topic? Because they know, they monitor you, and so they know what your work is on, and whether you're Turkish or something else. And but I did join the tours as a translator. Obviously, I'm not a translator, but so that made it a lot easier for us to move around. And the Turkish state sometimes made things a little difficult because I was on board, but it wasn't always the case. What else could I say? Why am I interested? I'm interested in a transitional justice in general in Turkey. So actually, Armenians are kind of circumstantial for me to study. But I was first enlightened at the university about the Kurdish question, and then we learned about the Armenian Genocide. These are happening in 2010s. So beginning of 2009, beginning of 2010, end of 2000s. This was this kind of opening that I happened to be at school, and I learned the things that you wouldn't be able to utter today in Turkey. So that's why I really consider myself really, really lucky. Kevin asked, how are Armenians received when they arrive in Turkey? This is a great question. Do the Turks know that they are Armenians looking at their former homelands? Yes. So a lot of Turks and Kurds will know that the tours have arrived. Tours are very, very popular. So every day by buses, in the summer especially, there will be like in the same spot, there will be like 6, 7 different tour companies that are just following after the other. Locals are not, generally, they're not hostile, actually. Often the type of hostility that happens is after Armenians leave. So like there were incidents, for instance, when Armenians left the site of a monastery by the peak of Mount Maratuk in Sasun. There was this hate crime basically against the site, where they just ruined the remaining structures of the ruin. But at other times, things are completely normal. The relationships are seemingly welcoming, and you don't really encounter much. You don't really encounter a confrontation at all, actually. But then we also know, the other thing we know is that after Armenians leave, often local treasure hunters will go hunt for treasure there. So this is the other dynamic effect of the pilgrimages / roots tourism itself, that the presence of the Armenians are also somehow causing more absence. And that's really unfortunate, I would say. Emily's question about Turkish government's attitude. So the Turkish government, it really shifted its perspectives. In the early 2000s and 2010s, it kind of peaked. It actually was very much towards protecting Armenian heritage. So the restoration project of Akhdamar church, and then the Ani restoration and preservation projects were kind of exemplary for this. But then towards the late 2010s, the Turkish state started dropping these policies towards Armenian heritage. And so recently there has been a controversy actually about a mass housing project that has been initiated by a state-led initiative called TOKI in Mush to actually raise the Armenian neighborhood to the ground. So it's complicated, I would say. Alan asked another question. Is there any example of claiming back such fragment stones by visiting Armenians who do not want such sacred symbols used in their houses or barns? We've seen some famous examples of such Scottish nationalist deeds with stones in England. Indeed. And this other fascinating thing that I'm working on. Armenians, whoever travels to Eastern Turkey, is tasked, including me, to bring soil, stones, and water from specific sites. And often sites change based on the person's connection to the site. Usually the ancestral hometown of the person, especially if there's a genocide survivor from there, then they usually take the soil and they reunite the body of the survivor with the soil. So these types of reclaiming practices are really, really famous. But I do not know if there is actually a part of a heritage site, such as a church stone that gets incorporated into the facades of houses, are taken back to Armenia. Possibly not, because that would be then considered a crime, which is really ironic, but yeah. And then Melanie's question, transitional justice, how would it look like for you in terms of how Turkish state maintains and preserves its historic sites? There are good examples of this across the world. So for instance, the type of Germany is a very good example because they have actually destroyed so many Jewish art, Jewish spaces, and then the restoration and reparation processes with the recognition of the Holocaust, the wrongdoing of the Nazi state, actually have been proved really productive. The Turkish state, basically what it needs to do, it needs to stop the treasure hunters in a very serious manner, because it's probably the most important act that actually ruins the heritage sites. And so another transitional justice program would include a protection, such as, Ani itself is a kind of a protected heritage site. It is receiving copious amounts of money from UNESCO, and so the Turkish state has to maintain it as is. And so it would have been actually really good if the Turkish state had actually taken this perspective to other sites, I'd say. There are no other open questions. So
thank you so much for answering all of those. That was more than the 3 we talked about. So everyone, I'm sure, appreciates it. And thank you so much again for such a wonderful presentation. And thank you everyone for coming. Take good care. And this will be available on YouTube. We'll send you all a link to everyone who registered, so it'll be available to you all for reference in the future. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me. It was very delightful.